YouTube channel shortly after this webinar ends. So don't worry, I will be sending out links as well as a copy of the slide deck and any other resources noted throughout the presentation. So you will receive all that after this webinar concludes. All right. I also wanted to note that for everyone on the call today, we will be operating in webinar mode. So if you have any questions throughout, I encourage you to click on the 9 little dots in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen that's called Meeting Tools, and you can go in there and go to the Q&A section to ask any questions you have. I do encourage you to ask questions throughout. We're going to be going through a lot of great content, and Luke is more than happy to answer your questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. All right, so just quickly as a reminder for some of you who may not be aware, the Maryland Clean Buildings Hub First Movers webinar series is a peer learning opportunity to help showcase and uplift Maryland buildings pursuing decarbonization. So guest speakers such as the tower companies today will share firsthand experience on advancing building decarbonization upgrades. They'll impart some lessons learned and also answer questions about their clean energy journey. If anyone on the call is interested in being featured as a guest speaker in the future, please feel free to reach out. We love to hear from you and get the conversation started. All right. So first things first, as a quick reintroduction, my name is Megan Lackey, and I help support the Maryland Clean Buildings Hub, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'm very excited to share that Luke Lanciano, the Director of Sustainability at the Tower Companies, is today's guest speaker, and he'll be sharing more about their Tower Companies decarb journey for the buildings located across Montgomery County, Maryland, and in Washington, D.C. They'll talk about things like their net zero emissions roadmap, challenges, successes, key strategies, lessons learned, and more. And just as a side note for people who are on the call, the Tower Company's Maryland properties are subject to the Montgomery County Building Energy Performance Standards, or BEPS, rather than the Maryland State BEPS, and are held to slightly different requirements. So he's going to touch on that slightly throughout the presentation, but just wanted to note that for anyone who is on the line. Okay. So with that being said, just to kick things off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Maryland Clean Buildings Hub, introducing what the hub is, its purpose and mission, as well as key resources for building owners and operators. Then I'll touch on a few exciting hub building decarbonization focused resources, webinar opportunities, and a program offering coming up. And then I'll pass the mic over to Luke. Okay. So first of all, for those of you who don't know what the Maryland Clean Buildings Hub does, what we do here, it's also known as just the Hub, and it is an initiative of the Maryland Energy Administration, and it aims to empower Maryland building owners to make well-informed energy investments in their facilities by connecting them to technical, financial, and educational resources. And those resources range from funding directories to vendor and service provider lists to building decarb planning guides, facility spotlights, case studies, and more. So I highly encourage anybody on this call to check that out. In addition, the Hub has an awesome updated website that we recently repurposed and refreshed, and it has all sorts of building decarb resources that are available on it. We also have a growing YouTube channel. As I noted earlier, a recording of this webinar will be posted on the YouTube channel after the fact, and I really suggest that you all check that out. There's all sorts of different videos covering a variety of grant program opportunities, building sector-specific conversations, and more. And then last, if you're not already subscribed, please consider signing up for the Hub's monthly newsletter called The Blueprint to stay informed on all the latest news, including relevant funding and financing announcements, educational offerings, events, case studies, and more. Okay. So I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the Hub ethos, really what we want to enshrine, what we want people to know about the Hub and how we are here to support them. So first is peer-to-peer learning. One of the most valuable aspects of the Hub's work is really connecting key stakeholders in the industry to learn from one another. As you probably know, peer-to-peer learning really allows us to share real-life experiences, best practices, and strategies so others can apply it to their own building decarbonization plans. I feel like it also helps provide a sense of community and accelerates progress across the board. Secondly, the Hub is here to help. The Hub is designed to be a go-to resource for Marylanders navigating their clean energy and building decarbonization journeys. Whether you're just exploring options or if you're already deep into project planning, the Hub's goal is to connect you with tools, guidance, and resources throughout the entire process. All right, next is that there's no wrong door. There's no single right time to begin advancing building decarbonization efforts, whether you're upgrading existing systems, planning future renovations, or if you're simply assessing your building's energy use. Every step forward counts, and the Hub can provide support to you along the way. And last, working together. We know that decarbonizing our buildings isn't always simple, but collaboration helps make it possible. So by working together, such as sharing knowledge, tips, key takeaways, we can help overcome challenges and pave the way for buildings that are more comfortable, energy efficient, resilient, and also reduce costs and carbon emissions in the long term. All right. Next up, I wanted to highlight a couple of upcoming events, program offerings, and resources that I think everyone on this call may benefit from. The first of which is the mechanical insulation webinar we have. It is going to be centered around mechanical insulation. It's happening on Wednesday, June 17th at 11 a.m. And we're going to be joined by the International Association of Heat and Frost Insulators and Allied Workers, also known as Insulators International. And we're going to be discussing efficiency benefits of mechanical insulation investments, as well as funding and technical assistance resources. So I encourage everyone to sign up for this event coming up next month. Again, a copy of this slide deck will be included in an email after the webinar. You can go ahead and click the link then to sign up. And you'll also have a chance to ask questions to Insulators International during a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And kind of learn how your building can benefit from mechanical insulation upgrades. Another exciting development I wanted to share was related to the BEPS Technical Assistance Program. So the Hub will soon be announcing the vendor it selected for the Building Energy Performance Standards Technical Assistance Program that we're going to be launching, expected sometime around this fall. The BEPS Technical Assistance Program is going to help building owners with properties covered by the state BEPS with compliance activities such as energy benchmarking and decarbonization planning. So stay tuned for more updates as this program gears up to launch. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. All right, and then last thing I wanted to note here is that the Hub recently launched a Building Decarbonization Incentive Library. And this library includes federal, state, local, utility, and other funding and financing opportunities that Marylanders may be eligible for investments that contribute to building decarbonization goals. This library is a living document and it's updated periodically to reflect the most current funding and financing offerings. And I just recently updated this yesterday, so it should be up to date. I also have a link on this slide if anyone's curious and wants to explore MEA grants and rebates. We have a webpage that talks about that specifically. So feel free to check back on that page also for FY27 program updates. All right, so last slide for me. Before we move on, I just really wanted to reiterate one more time that the Hub provides a range of offerings to help building owners and operators make well-informed energy investments in their properties through our technical, financial, and educational resources. These resources can be accessed through a variety of ways, whether it's our YouTube channel, our website, or if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter. There's a lot of different ways to connect with us. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at cleanbuildingshub@maryland.gov. All right, without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to our guest speaker, Luke, to talk about the Tower Company's building decarbonization journey.
All right, Thank you so much, Megan. Let me get my screen shared. One second. All right. Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. As Megan mentioned, my name is Luke Lanciano. I'm with the Tower Companies. I'm here to talk about the sustainability team here at Tower. Um, the Tower Companies, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things we've done. But I think a big thing to mention is this is our vision statement here listed on this slide. We envision a world where buildings inspire and enrich the lives of their occupants and create positive social change. So we're a very forward-thinking firm whose ownership has been pursuing sustainability for many years. Very focused on both sustainability from the energy side, but as well as from the health and wellness side. So I hope to explore that with you guys today. A little bit about me. I certainly currently serve as the Director of Sustainability for Tower. I'm also a lead AP in operations and maintenance, Fitwell ambassador, and a certified energy manager. Um, I work a bit on the sort of BEPS regulatory side with the county on its Building Performance Improvement Board. Several years ago, as Maryland was looking to establish its own BEPS program, I served on a task force at the state level, and then worked with some of our local trade organizations to share information about sustainability, to encourage other actors within the building space and management space to pursue some of these sustainability objectives. So the Tower Companies was founded in 1947, basically in the post-war period. The founder of Tower looked around at the DC region and saw that there were some opportunity, like there was just going to be a lot of growth in the region. So he began, developing buildings. So essentially, what we have done over these past almost 80 years has been to develop assets, office buildings, shopping centers, multifamily buildings, um, maintain full ownership, and then manage them for the long term. So some developers will only do developments and then sell those projects on after a couple of years of ownership. Other, building sector folks will just manage as a third-party manager for other owners. And then other folks in the building space might own a building, but somebody else manages it day to day. So this is sort of the niche that we fill with our work. And as I mentioned, we have a very strong focus on sustainable and healthy building operations. We've had a number of firsts in the local market in particular. So we've done a lot of work with LEED over the years. This building pictured on the right is our corporate headquarters at 2000 Tower Oaks Boulevard in Rockville. This is the first LEED Platinum multi-tenant office building certified in the Mid-Atlantic, which we're very proud of, and I'm actually sitting in right now. We pretty recently, back in 2018, did the first Fitwell certified multifamily building. Fitwell is more a healthy building certification focused on wellness. And this was the first Fitwell certified multifamily building anywhere, done in 2018. And I was really glad very recently we ended up getting the first two buildings in Maryland certified under Energy Star's Next Gen certification, which is a pretty neat certification. It's kind of an extra level beyond Energy Star's typical efficiency certification. I'm going to talk a little bit more today about our decarbonization goal for 2047, which is going to be the centennial of Tower's founding, as well as about some of the work that we do across our buildings to help reach that particular goal. So when I'm talking about sustainability across, external parties, internal, clients, residents, even team members within Tower, I try to break it into a few different buckets because sustainability, healthy buildings work, it can cover a ton of ground. So these are sort of my 5 pillars that I always sort of refer back to. Try to make sure that we're, making progress in each area, that we're maintaining a really high level of operational efficiency and effectiveness. Um, Items 1 and 2 is carbon neutrality and energy efficiency. That's going to really be the focus of this presentation. Certainly, though, if anyone is interested in kind of our health and wellness work, everything from ventilation standards to IEQ testing, as well as some of our sustainable transit work, landfill diversion, composting, all that good stuff, don't hesitate to reach out. Feel free to ask a question in the chat if you're interested, but I will focus mainly on our carbon neutrality and energy efficiency work. Before we start, though, like the thing you got to do with a building is to benchmark. Some key steps that I recommend everyone be taking, even if it's, even if you did some benchmarking last year for the Maryland State BEPS, and you're doing it again, or you're working with clients that have just started this benchmarking process. It's really important to confirm things like gross floor area. That's the sort of denominator when you're looking at site energy use intensity, which is a really key metric within essentially all the BEPS programs, but it also helps you benchmark more closely to different property use types. Another thing, and I'm sure many people are looking to do this as well, automating the benchmarking process as much as you can. Many utilities will offer sort of an automatic update every month to your benchmarking profile with things like electric use or gas use. It can be slightly finicky to set up the first time, but once it's set up and as long as you monitor it, and I'll tell the next slide, you'll see why it's important to monitor it. That will save you a lot of time and allow you to do the actual efficiency work that matters most for buildings. Once you're benchmarked, especially if you have a decently sized portfolio, you compare your buildings by their use type to peer buildings, to buildings of the same age, vintage, type of system. And from that, you can often gather a lot of data and help prioritize your work. We do this a lot, and I'll show you kind of one of the exercises for our multifamily portfolio in a little bit. But even if you don't have many properties, looking at something like national median site EUIs can be really helpful. It gives you a sense of where you fall with your property. So if it's an office building, the site EUI national median is about 52.9. If you're recording like a 120, 140 site EUI for an office building, that's a very clear sign that you need to look at that particular property and find ways to reduce energy use or make some adjustments in your benchmarking system because there might be an inaccuracy somewhere. You should probably expect to be somewhere within 20 to 30% of these median site EUIs for most projects. There are some very efficient buildings that can get very low site EUIs. But especially when it comes to BEPS, you want to make sure your data is accurate as possible so that you can use the right data going forward as you do capital planning. I wanted to showcase this. We utilize PEPCO in our area, and PEPCO's utility benchmarking data can be very, very helpful. But sometimes there are anomalies. So what I'm showing here is one of our buildings with aggregated data. So there's a lot of electric meters on site at this property, and we can see pretty clearly like there's a trend for the last 6 years. And what we noticed pretty obviously is that red line at the bottom, significant reduction in electric use. That would be phenomenal if we had pursued a major change in December or early January of 2025. Uh, we did not make a major change, so my worry is this was inaccurate, and it does seem to be inaccurate. We worked with the utility, talked with them, made sure that we were looking at the right information before we submitted anything. This is a really key thing to look at when you're, especially when you're starting out, trying to get data from the last several years to make sure that it's within a reasonable trend, and then you can start to sort of identify interesting anomalies. I was like pointing out, it looks like in March of 2020, which I think everyone remembers, not so fondly. We had some much lower energy use. This was it ended up being a period of late vacancy at this building. But you can also see kind of the energy use tends to be peaking in the winter months. This is an all-electric building, so it uses electric heat, and that's something we find fairly regularly. Whereas in the April timeframe, as well as usually October, we have lower energy use generally at this asset. Um, so as I'm looking at our buildings, it's great to have monthly utility bill data, but real-time energy data, I think, is really where you're going to find the most value, especially if you're looking at an office building. I want to give you a kind of a brief look at, one of our data sets. This is one of our office buildings from earlier this year. We were comparing 2026 and 2025 data. This is looks like early February for both of the buildings, or both of the timeframes that we were looking at. Um, One thing with real-time energy data, there is sometimes green button data that you can get from your utility, but it may also require shadow metering if you want up to the minute or up to the 15-minute interval data available to you and your team. That's what we do. So, we work with a firm that essentially monitors our electric use every 15 minutes and reports that data directly to us. This is super helpful, especially in offices, because you have a very standardized energy use profile. There is a startup process that happens in the morning. That's oftentimes when you get peaks because many pieces of equipment are cutting on at the exact same time, trying to get the building to temperature. So one of the things we're always looking at doing is optimizing startup time. So as you can kind of see, this purple line is from 2025, and then the light blue line is from 2026. So the startup time had shifted a few hours earlier between those two dates. Sometimes you can't help this entirely. Very, very cold days were occurring in early February. So we do need to make sure our buildings hit the right temperature during lease hours. But this was a way that we could very quickly identify this change, talk with our teams, see if there were ways to adjust that. Similarly, you can see in 2025 at this time frame, you had kind of a staged electrical startup process. So this was likely, several of the air handlers kicking on a little bit early before the chiller or a particular cooling or heating system was kicked on. That helps reduce the peaks, which is very good, especially for your energy costs. And if you can keep that peak demand level, especially below 1,000, that's usually pretty good. There are direct costs that come from setting a peak demand charge each month. So the more that you can reduce that, the better. On the opposite side of the day, we need to shut the building down essentially. For an office building with low to no occupancy in the evenings, you want the overnight energy use to be as low as feasible. There's always going to be some energy needs in the building, whether that's maintaining some safe temperature to avoid, say, pipes freezing, or really excessive challenges in the morning getting back to temperature. There's also emergency systems that need to stay active, fire pumps, elevators, lighting, and sort of emergency egress areas. But the more that you can do to bring down your overnight energy use, the better. And you can also identify some interesting trends. So, like, you might see some bumps. I think especially on this day, and this was this past year, you see this one line that's just weirdly elevated. It then peaks and then sort of shuts down. This almost certainly was a piece of equipment left running a little bit beyond the shutdown time. So our team, being able to see this data very regularly, can identify that problem and address it so that we don't have the situation where you might have like a much higher overnight energy use, because that then every single day will add up as electrical use. Um, Big thing to mention, obviously, between February of 2025 and 2026, we all remember the cold that we experienced. So weather does play a big factor in some of these energy costs. And there are some things you can't fully control, but we work with our engineers every month to look at this data, talk through what challenges exist, how the controls are working. If we've been able to review this data regularly, and that helps us over time just keep the energy use very, very efficient. I wanted to just share some like efficiency projects that in our experience have been really effective in a variety of use cases. So, when you're talking about electricity, you're talking really about things like lighting and HVAC. Lighting should be a small part of your energy use overall, because LED lights are very cost effective. They last a long time, and you can retrofit them fairly easily in many circumstances. A thing that we've done a lot of over the past really 15 to 20 years is putting variable frequency drives in to help control some pumps, some motors, fans. That helps you sort of scale up and down the energy use that you need really effectively. And you typically can get really good incentives with those VFDs and be able to control your building on an occupancy basis much more effectively. Shifting over to gas, adjusting your boiler, like making sure the set points are reasonable, putting some controls in place are really, really helpful if you have a gas boiler. Insulation and envelope improvements are really valuable for gas, and I'll explore what we did in some of our multifamily buildings here. And then multifamily and office have slightly different approaches that you might want to consider in terms of efficiency projects. I think the big one in multifamily is try to standardize high efficiency turnover. So like whenever you're doing, somebody vacates an apartment, you should have a standard package of, Energy Star appliances that you use, water sense fixtures that might go into that apartment during the turnover process. That then helps over the course of a couple of years as people vacate the building, new folks move in. You can slowly make that building more efficient over time. Offices have a much greater focus on the HVAC system because of how standardized that energy use pattern is that we'd seen previously. So a lot of these measures are really focused on getting that HVAC under full control, making sure set points are appropriately set, getting your trend analysis done through oftentimes there's a BMS or building management system in place. And then similar to turnovers in the multifamily space, green leasing is very valuable in offices, which is where new folks might move into an office. In a green lease, you can say, here are the required fits and fixtures that you can utilize as you build out this space. And again, over time, that helps improve that particular office building a lot. I wanted to show some of our multifamily portfolio and how we're relating to the Montgomery County BEPS standard. Megan had mentioned because we're in Montgomery County, we sort of follow this standard, which is site EUI based rather than sort of Maryland's on-site emissions approach. But this is kind of me looking really at site EUI across these buildings. And so, 37 is the BEPS site EUI target right now for Montgomery County. I broke out site EUI into, the green is showing electric EUI. So this is the energy use intensity just from the electric use in those buildings. And then blue is for the gas systems in place. As you can tell, in some buildings, we have a lot of gas. Basically, the majority of energy use is gas systems, whereas in this building, the Pearl, which is actually that's the first Fitwel certified building out there. It's a really, really highly efficient building and very safely under the BEPS target. Has a very low gas use. It's very, very small amount for certain amenity features. So this is helpful for me because we can very quickly identify like what are some problem areas, where might, for example, these two buildings, there might just need to be some small efficiency improvements made, and then we can get below that threshold. But for these three buildings down here, what we're seeing is a much higher energy use intensity, which we'll need to make more substantial improvements to. And by pulling this data in this way, very quickly helps prioritize the interventions we try to make. Looking at those three buildings on the, in that previous slide, I'm trying to sort of scope out our compliance pathway. This is sort of based a lot on Montgomery County guidelines, but it's very applicable to many other property use types and BEPS programs. Drawing a straight line from where we were in 2022 to where we need to be by about 2035. That then allows me to track every year as we keep benchmarking. Where are we? Have we made enough improvements at this stage to fit that pathway? And how should we be thinking about the capital planning cycle? So, for example, at these buildings, we had recently finished up a window project that tightened up the building, which, within the next probably 6 months, I should have a good full data set to analyze and see how that improved the annualized energy use intensity. But yeah, that tighter envelope allows us to, basically reduce the demand for heating, for cooling in those buildings, as well as provide a bunch of thermal comfort benefits for residents. And that then helps us in our next stage of the process, which would be evaluating equipment and trying to make sure controls and equipment are properly tuned for the buildings. There we go. This is a photo of one of our multifamily buildings, Blair East. This building underwent, some of our window replacements this past, really over the past 2.5 years. By late 2025, we finished a really large window project where we had removed and then installed 3,400 windows across these three buildings. And these three buildings are, important for a variety of reasons. They did not meet the MOCO BEPS. We do want to make sure they can reduce their energy use. But what I also saw is they use almost 80% of our annual natural gas use, just those three buildings. So, reducing their gas consumption would also dramatically benefit some of the greenhouse gas accounting work that I do, and I'll explore in just a moment. So these new windows were a big help. We've already gotten, lots of anecdotal, compliments from residents. It's more comfortable. We've seen in certain circumstances that the demand for heating, especially, with this very cold period that we experienced earlier this year, we just did not need to run the boilers quite as heavily as we have in past years, because really that heat just stays contained in units. So that's a very positive sign, and we're hopeful that the data as it comes available will be very positive for this project. Here's a little bit more details, kind of a view of what it looked like during the project as they were going down, replacing windows. For any sort of window nerds out there, we reduced the U value pretty dramatically. The new window assemblies do not have thermal bridging, and that's a great way to basically avoid the energy loss that is experienced when there are thermal bridges. I think what we're going to notice, a lot of with these adjusted U values and the lack of thermal bridging is that we're just not going to lose heat in winter, much lower heat gain in summer. There will always be some because they are windows. When the sun hits any window, there's going to be some heat gain, but the benefits I think have already been sort of shown, at least in the most recent winter. And we're very excited to see how this progresses. A lot of benefits also on the acoustic side. So if you have very old windows in your building, in a multifamily building, I do recommend considering this in your benchmarking BEPS compliance process. I wanted to review just a couple challenges before going into some greenhouse gas accounting work that we do. Um, these should probably be familiar to many folks if you've sort of worked in this space for a while, but this is something we're experiencing and we're looking at a lot in our multifamily buildings, where we have gas stoves, and we need to think about the future. You really need a lot of electrical service in every unit to make that switch. So that's coming into our thinking. We did an electrification feasibility study several years ago, looked at some of the potential costs included in that, and that's helping inform our capital planning cycle. That's a lot of electrical service just for a stove replacement. Similarly, as we look at like gas water heating, gas heating hot water. Those are two areas where you need to find the right type of electrical equipment that can either support the central load or increase the electrical service in each unit. Because many units can be unitized, which means there's one unit per apartment. But the challenge with that is you need to plug it in somewhere, right? So when you have limited electrical service in those units, you might need to upgrade the electrical service before you even consider, swapping out gas stoves, changing out heating or domestic hot water systems from gas to electric. Sort of stepping back from the more specific buildings, this is kind of a look at our carbon neutrality work. We are part of the Net Zero Imperative with ULI's Greenprint program. We work with the Climate Registry to record all of our emissions and emissions reductions. And since 2010, we have offset our market-based emissions. So that means we're purchasing renewable electricity. And for the gas side, we've purchased verified carbon offsets for gas use. Now, obviously, that does not change the actual location-based emissions. That is kind of just a recognition that there's not a great way to reduce those location-based emissions while you're still using any gas or even electricity locally. I sort of did some math around the greenhouse gas intensity of local electrical use as well as local gas use. Electricity is a scope 2 emission, whereas gas is a scope 1 emission. Another way to frame that is electricity emissions come from the power plants, which are often many miles away. Whereas gas use produces on-site emissions, which are sort of directly, like you light a gas burner, it's immediately burning off some of that natural gas, whether it's methane or some of the various emissions that come from that. Now, our 2047 goal, as I mentioned at the top, is to eliminate our location-based on-site emissions, because what we're seeing is, this is this is really the only way that we can effectively meet, some of the climate targets that are out there. Even if the United States has some different opinions at the exact moment, we still believe in them, and we think that's an important thing to focus on. But to fully do that, to fully eliminate all location-based emissions, we do need, the electrical grid to sort of follow suit. We will be relying on electricity, so that grid needs to be 100% clean by 2047 for us to fully eliminate all emissions. I'm running a little bit late on time, but wanted to just showcase our portfolio over the past, 14, 15 years. Our 2025 data should be posted soon, but we met and achieved our 2010 goal that was set a few years back. We've achieved 33% energy savings since that time. I think I briefly reviewed this. Decarbonization is about energy efficiency. It's about eliminating your direct emissions, that gas use, and 100% renewable electricity. Right now, with the Maryland BEPS, the direct emissions or gas use, on-site emissions, they all mean the same thing. It's really what's being targeted. But you will find oftentimes a lot of energy efficiency incentives from utility programs, and 100% renewable electricity. It can be purchased if you do pay a little bit of a premium for that electricity. But the biggest thing that would need to change in the region is for our electricity supply to just become dramatically cleaner. Just going to briefly fly through this. This is our roadmap. So our goal is to basically reduce the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Scope 2 is the electric use. Scope 1 is the gas use. So we've already done a fair bit of work since 2010. Most recent data upload for this was from 2023, with the goal by 2030 to get it down pretty significantly. We're not quite at this level yet, but we are hoping within the next several years to get there. A big focus area is the gas use that's in place at those multifamily buildings, because it has such a dramatic impact on our emissions. And using sort of equipment replacement cycles in the CapEx project is going to be how we help get there. And then I wanted to end on this. This is sort of a big challenge that we're running into, is the spark gap. I'm sure many people have heard of this before. Essentially, what we find is, gas use is just far cheaper per kBTU than electric. And even when you compare like effective gas use, so if you eliminate kind of that heating loss that you get with gas, and you utilize sort of high COP electric heat pump technologies, there is still this gap that you can kind of see here. And I think this is a really good argument for the approach that we've taken around efficiency. So you should not be trying to replace your gas equipment with electric equipment if it's the exact same sizing for the same demand. You got to bring your demand down first before you size any electric replacements, because that's going to be how you, in a cost-effective way, are able to decarbonize. Right. So I'm going to stop sharing.
All right. Thanks, Luke. That was great. I don't know if you saw the Q&A throughout your presentation, but we got a lot of good questions.
Okay.
So at this point in the webinar, everyone, we're going to shift over into our Q&A session. So if you have any questions, I'll just give a quick reminder. In the bottom right-hand corner in meeting tools, there's those 9 little dots. You can click that, and there's a Q&A button. If you want to ask any questions now, please feel free to do so, and we will get through as many as we can in the next 10 minutes we have here. And thanks again to Luke for such a great presentation. All right, so we have a couple in here. let's see where I want to get started. How about this one? We had someone ask, how do you balance long-term building decarbonization and electrification goals with day-to-day operational needs across your properties?
It's a great question. It's definitely a challenge we run into. Like my, so maybe backing up, my career in real estate started on the operations side. So doing actual like property management, turnover scheduling, like fixing problems in buildings, managing major capital replacement projects. So I do have a strong bias towards day to day, like getting things working the way they ought to work. So that's definitely something I try to maintain, even as my scope has expanded. That said, there is a lot of importance to be made to like stop and like budget for the future, whether it's a capital planning process, whether it's getting a lot of people in a room to talk about the future of a building. Because that, if you're repositioning a property entirely, that has a lot of impacts on the future of that building's energy use. So yeah, it's a real challenge. I would probably say that too many people sometimes focus on like the long term and not enough people focus on the day to day. But you do need to focus on both in this kind of role.
All right, perfect. Let's see here. We had a question earlier asking, what are the most notable benefits to benchmarking your properties beyond BEPS related compliance?
Well, there's, the big thing that Energy Star Portfolio Manager, had been previously used before BEPS, was around basically like sharing that information with potential clients in your building, as well as getting certified under Energy Star's certification program. We've had, countless Energy Star certifications over the years. Especially like in our office portfolio, that has really helped for many, many years, as we're bringing in new clients to office buildings, which, the last few years, as people may know, office buildings have taken a bit of a hit in the local market. But as we work to differentiate our buildings, Energy Star is a really useful tool for that. Being able to show like, hey, this building performs, 85% better than your like typical office building, helps that particular client as they're moving in realize like, oh, this is a property that I feel proud to lease in. And the operating expenses for this building that end up passing through oftentimes to tenants, like they'll just be lower on a per square foot basis because this property is being so well maintained. So that's one of the ways that we look at its value proposition.
Fantastic. All right. And thank you everyone for the questions here. We have a bunch of good ones in the chat. Let's go here. This is a bit of a two-parter. So it says here, for multifamily properties EUI, how does tenant behavior or tenant energy use play a role in measured energy use data? And how are you addressing tenant energy use from property management or an owner perspective?
Yeah, tenants control a large portion of the energy use in a multifamily building. It will always vary based on the type of systems you have. So in some cases, you might have central heating cooling systems where, maybe a tenant has fan coil units or radiators or something along those lines. That there's a little bit more of a focus on kind of the central plant level. But in many cases, you have unit systems. So like your own air conditioning unit, heating furnace, that sort of thing. Those get very challenging. The way we've typically focused is on the turnover process, making sure that we have the best equipment in those spaces as a new person moves in. This might, be anything from just just making sure all the pieces of equipment work well. If you have I remember in my early days, fridges, before probably 2005 or so, were incredibly energy intensive. So just swapping out a fridge for an Energy Star rated fridge was a neat little efficiency metric that no one noticed because they just had a new fridge and it happened to be very efficient. Um, you can get that same level of benefit if you make sure the lighting is, highly efficient LED style lighting. If you we found smart thermostats. If you get the right one, like sometimes they can be finicky, but if you get the right smart thermostat, people like that. It helps reduce HVAC use, which is typically the highest portion of a building's energy use. It could be anywhere from like 60% to probably 80% of the energy use in a space. So the more that you can hit those key areas, the better.
Great. We have a quick one here asking if you can remind us how many buildings are in your portfolio.
So we have really 11 active buildings. I phrase it that way because the shopping centers are a slightly different building typology. It's kind of a different way to view that. And then there are some ownership interests that are not fully actively managed by us, as well as some projects that are sort of on deck for development. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying. We have a question asking about what tools or software suite do you use to track and monitor your energy consumption and analysis?
There's a lot. Yeah, I mean, the utility companies in our area do offer some free tools that are just sort of associated with the accounts that they manage for us, as well as their sort of utility data suite that helps with aggregated data. That's really helpful on a monthly basis, and especially as you're making the case around cost, having those actual like utility bill data available can be very useful. On a day-to-day basis, as we're looking at real-time energy use, we have shadow meter systems. Those are through the company Wellstat. They basically like sort of monitor the real-time energy use in a building and then to report that out. That company also offers indoor air quality sensors, and then many of our larger office buildings have different building management systems. So everything from yeah, there's a whole range out there, but yeah, different mechanical equipment manufacturers and building management system integrators will put in systems there, and sort of all of that together combines to give us a good view of energy use within the portfolio.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks. I think we'll have time maybe for 2 or 3 more, depending here. Um, we got a question from Anna asking that you mentioned green leasing for offices. What are some concerns or options for multifamily?
Yeah, so we do have some green lease provisions in our multifamily lease contract. I think the challenge that we run into is, it's like you can't really tell somebody like, hey, you can't have heating beyond 73 or 74 degrees effectively. Like it just isn't. Well, it's yeah, there's not a great way to control that. Whereas in an office lease, it's a little bit more formal. You can have some parameters set up where like they might be doing a major build out of their space. You can make sure that they're putting in highly efficient HVAC systems, that it's all being properly monitored and metered, that they pay for any extra energy use that they might have. On the multifamily side, I think the biggest value is really in the turnover process, and in helping communicate with residents. Like, here are the things that we are doing on site at the building, because there is some pass through effect. Like, I often will look at our composting efforts, which are totally unrelated to energy. There are some definite emissions benefits there, but because we do composting, people can see that very directly. Like there's a little bin in the trash room. They can put their compost in there. And our hope, and at least what I've heard from residents is like they understand that we care about this stuff because we offer that. And our hope is always that they think about that the next time they leave, lights on all day and night when they're out of town, or the HVAC system at the highest setting. Those are some of the ways that we try to work with folks on the multifamily side.
Awesome. Luke, do you have time for one more before we wrap things up?
Sure.
All right. All right. So last one here. Where do you see the lowest hanging fruit for energy efficiency improvements, both from a cost and site EUI improvement standpoint?
It's a great question. I think getting probably the most effective thing you can do is get your team on board. So, like, if it's just one sustainability person in a company who's focused on this stuff, you can only go so far. Like, you can make some tweaks here and there, but if you can get the building engineers on your side, if they're operating the HVAC system as efficiently as humanly possible, you can have much more impact just from a sustainability lens. Like, it can be challenging sometimes. People are occasionally resistant to change, but that's probably been like one of Tower's superpowers is for many years we've had a really strong engineering culture, and we're trying to do these things oftentimes by ourselves on the engineering side. So literally programming VFDs is something our team does. They understand how to do that and to work with the different BMS vendors to make sure the system is tuned. So I would strongly recommend like working with your team on site, engineers, even property managers if they're sort of technically inclined, to get them on the team, because the bigger that team, the more effective you can be.
Okay. I think that about wraps it up for us today. And thanks to the audience for your great questions. I love the engagement. And Luke, I don't want to speak for you, but if anyone has any other questions, are they free to reach out to you individually if they want to chat more?
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you again. This was really great to hear from you. And I hope everyone got a lot out of this webinar today. So thank you all for joining, and I will circle back with an email to everyone who registered with a copy of PowerPoint slide deck, link to the webinar recording, any other resources we talked about today, our contact info. So stay posted. All right.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Okay. Bye.